The train rolled through the misty countryside, its rhythm a steady heartbeat against the silence of dawn. Through the window, Elena watched the world pass, fields soaked with dew, lonely houses with dim kitchen lights, and the faint outlines of hills that faded into pale clouds. It was the first train she had taken home in years, and the air outside looked like the kind of quiet she had forgotten how to feel. She held a letter in her hands. The paper was soft and worn, creased too many times from being folded and unfolded. It was her brother's handwriting, shaky but familiar, the kind that made her chest tighten with a strange mix of warmth and regret. "Come home, Lena. She's asking for you." Her mother's health had always been fragile, but something in the shortness of the sentence told her it was different this time. Final, maybe. She wanted to believe she was ready, that she had built enough distance from the past to face it again. But as the train slowed near her old town, her heart refused to agree. The station was almost empty. Just two benches, a rusted clock, and a vending machine humming in the corner. Elena stepped down, pulling her coat tighter as the morning chill brushed her skin. The smell of wet leaves, the sound of birds waking, everything felt painfully unchanged. Even the cracked asphalt of the road leading to her mother's house was exactly as she remembered. Her brother, Daniel, was waiting near the car. He hadn't changed much, still with the same soft eyes and tired smile, though streaks of gray had started to show in his hair. "You came," he said quietly. "Of course I did," she replied, but her voice trembled more than she wanted it to. The drive home was long and wordless. Fields stretched endlessly on both sides, the road winding between them like an old scar. Elena kept looking out the window, counting telephone poles, trying not to think about the last time she had been. Here, the shouting, the slammed doors, the look in her mother's eyes when she left. That look had followed her for years, even across cities, countries, new lives. When they reached the house, the silence grew heavier. The white paint on the porch was peeling, the flowers in the garden had wilted. The curtains were still drawn like the house was asleep. Daniel turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. "She's inside," he said finally. "It's not good." Elena nodded, her fingers tightening around the letter. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and medicine. The old clock on the wall ticked with a sound that felt too loud. Her mother was lying in the small bedroom, the one facing the apple trees. The sight of her, smaller, thinner, but still unmistakably her, hit harder than she expected. "Lena," her mother's voice was a whisper, but it broke something open inside her. "Hi, Mom. You look the same," her mother smiled faintly. "Older eyes, maybe. And you," Elena said softly, "still know how to make me feel 10 again." They both laughed, not loudly, but with the kind of fragile laughter that sits between tears. The room seemed to breathe again for a moment. Her mother reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and Elena took it, realizing how much she'd missed that touch, how much of her childhood was hidden inside it. "Do you still write?" her mother asked suddenly. Elena looked down. "Not much. Not like before." "You should," her mother said. "You always had a way with words. Your letters used to sound like music." Elena swallowed hard. "Maybe I ran out of things to say." Her mother smiled. "Then maybe it's time you start listening again." Later that evening, when Daniel had gone to make tea, Elena sat by the window and looked outside. The same apple trees stood there, heavy with fruit. Beyond them, the sky was turning gold. She thought of all the years she had spent running, not from her home, but from the silence that came with it. Silence that reminded her of everything left unsaid. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the old hallway, her footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floor. The pictures on the walls were faded, her father holding Daniel on his shoulders, her mother smiling beside them. Her own face in those pictures looked almost like a stranger's. In the kitchen, the faint sound of a radio played. It was an old song, one her mother used to hum while cooking. The melody drifted through the air like a ghost. Elena closed her eyes, remembering the mornings when that song meant pancakes and laughter, not hospital beds and whispered goodbyes. When Daniel came in, he leaned against the counter, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" "Not really," she said. "Too many ghosts in this house." He nodded slowly. "You know, Mom never blamed you. Not once." "I blamed me enough for both of us," Elena whispered. They sat in silence for a while. The tea grew cold. "She kept all your letters," Daniel said suddenly. "Every single one." Elena looked up, confused. What letters? The ones you sent when you moved away. You think she didn't get them, but she did. She just didn't know how to answer. A lump formed in Elena's throat. I thought she didn't care. She cared too much. She didn't want to say the wrong thing and lose you again. The tears came quietly. They didn't need to be loud. Some grief is too old for that. Elena felt a strange calm settle over her, like the house itself was finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. When dawn came, she went outside. The grass was still wet, and the air smelled like rain. The apple trees swayed softly in the breeze. She stood there for a long time, until the first light touched her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. The next morning came with the slow hum of rain. Thin streaks of water trickled down the window, making the world outside blur into silver and green. Elena stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of coffee that smelled like childhood. Daniel was reading the paper, though his eyes didn't seem to follow the words. The radio played softly, the same song as the night before. For a moment, Elena imagined they were kids again. No hospital rooms, no letters unsent. Just rain outside and toast burning slightly in the old toaster. She wanted to say something simple, like, "Do you remember when?" But the weight of years between them made the words feel fragile. Instead, she said quietly, "How bad is it, really?" Daniel looked up, the kind of look that answered before he spoke. They said maybe a few weeks. Maybe less. The sound of the clock filled the silence. Elena's hands trembled slightly, and she set the spoon down. She doesn't look ready to leave. She's been ready, Daniel said softly. Just waiting for you. That hit harder than she expected. Later, she walked through the garden, the one her mother used to tend every morning. The earth smelled alive, rich with rain. She knelt down and touched the damp soil, remembering the way her mother used to hum while planting marigolds, saying they brought sunlight even when the sky forgot. The gate creaked open behind her. "You're up early," Daniel said, stepping closer. "Couldn't sleep. Still thinking too much." "I always do." He smiled faintly. "You know, Mom used to sit out here even when she couldn't really move anymore. Said she wanted the flowers to know she hadn't given up." Elena laughed softly, brushing her hair aside. That sounds like her. For a long while, they just stood there in the rain. It wasn't uncomfortable silence anymore. It felt almost healing. The kind of quiet where words weren't needed. Inside, her mother was awake. She was propped up against the pillows, flipping slowly through an old photo album. When Elena entered, she looked up and smiled. "Do you remember this?" she asked, pointing at a picture. Elena at 12, holding a broken kite, hair wild from wind. Her father had taken it the summer before he died. "I hated that kite," Elena said with a faint laugh. "It never flew straight." Her mother traced the photo with her fingertip. "You cried for hours when it broke. Said you wanted to fix it yourself. Your father told you it wasn't worth the trouble, but you stayed out there all afternoon. Did I fix it?" Her mother smiled. "No, but you learned how the wind worked." That small memory cracked something open inside her, a reminder that not every failure was wasted. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "You've built a good life, haven't you?" Elena hesitated. "It looks good on paper. A job, an apartment, a few friends. But sometimes I feel like I've been running in circles." "Running from what?" Elena looked away. "Maybe from this place. From everything I didn't say." Her mother nodded slowly. "We all run from something. The trick is knowing when to stop." The rain outside had stopped by afternoon, and a faint warmth filled the room. Daniel cooked soup in the kitchen while Elena read aloud. Old poetry books her mother had kept beside the bed. Her voice shook at first, but soon it grew steady, gentle, like music from another time. When she finished, her mother closed her eyes and said, "You sound like him." "Who?" "Your father. He used to read to me at night when I couldn't sleep. You had his tone, soft, like he was afraid the world might break if he spoke too loudly." Elena smiled through her tears. She had spent years trying to forget her father's voice. But hearing it described that way brought it back in flashes, the way he'd sit on the porch, the sound of his laugh echoing through summer evenings. She wanted to ask about him, about everything she never understood, but her mother was already drifting to sleep. That night, Elena sat outside with Daniel. The stars were faint, veiled by clouds. Fireflies blinked near the fence like small, hesitant lights. "You remember when Dad built that treehouse?" Daniel said. "How could I forget? You fell out of it the first day." He laughed. And you made me promise not to tell anyone because you didn't want Mom to take it down. She found out anyway. Elena smiled. She always did. The laughter faded, and a quieter tone took over. You know, Daniel said. When you left, I thought you'd never come back. I thought so too, she admitted. Every time I tried, something stopped me. Guilt, fear. I don't know. She used to sit by the phone every night, even when she pretended not to. I'd hear her pick it up, listen for a tone, then hang up again. I think she hoped she'd hear your voice before the beep. Elena closed her eyes, fighting back the tears. I didn't know. She didn't want you to. The night deepened around them. Crickets chirped, wind moved through the trees, and for the first time, it didn't sound empty. It sounded alive. The following day, Elena found something in her old bedroom, a box under the bed, covered in dust. Inside were her childhood notebooks, drawings, and a few letters she had written but never sent. One caught her attention. It was addressed to herself. The date was 10 years ago. The letter read, "If you're reading this, maybe you finally stopped running. Maybe you found a way to forgive yourself for leaving. You weren't wrong to go. You were just scared to stay. And that's okay. But one day, you'll realize that the place you left behind was still waiting for you to come home." Her hands shook as she read the last line. She could barely remember writing it, but it felt like a message from a version of herself who had known what she would become. She sat on the floor, tears falling silently. She had thought she came home to say goodbye, but maybe she came home to remember who she was. When Daniel entered the room, he paused at the doorway. You found it, didn't you? You knew about this? He nodded. Mom told me not to throw anything away. She said one day you'd need to see what you left behind. Elena smiled through her tears. She was right. She usually was. They both laughed, soft, tired laughter that filled the room like sunlight. That evening, Elena brought the letter to her mother's bedside. She read it aloud, voice trembling at first, then steadying. When she finished, her mother reached for her hand and whispered, "You've always known your way home, even when you thought you didn't." For a while, neither of them spoke. The window was open, and the smell of rain lingered in the air. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, like a memory folding itself back into silence. Elena leaned forward, pressing her forehead against her mother's hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." Her mother smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "There's nothing left to be sorry for, my love. You came back. That's all that ever mattered." The clock ticked quietly on the wall. A wind stirred the curtains. Outside, the first fireflies of the evening began to glow, small, fragile lights flickering in the dark. Programa Chat GPT Skazala. Part 3. 12,000 characters. The week following the storm was calm. The air felt rinsed clean, the city's rhythm steady again. Daniel sat on the balcony, watching sunlight flicker through the vines that had climbed up the railing. He had a notebook in his lap, something he hadn't opened in months, and a pen resting loosely between his fingers. The words didn't come easily, but they came honestly. Small fragments, stray observations, feelings he'd buried beneath daily noise. He wrote about Emma's laughter, the quiet of mornings in that apartment, the strange stillness that followed loss. He didn't know what the notebook would become, a story, a confession, a memory, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the blank page. Inside, the coffee machine hummed. Emma moved softly around the kitchen, her hair tied up, humming a tune he couldn't name. She glanced at him through the glass doors, her smile unguarded. It had been 6 months since they'd met again. Not as the same people, not the reckless lovers who had once thought the world revolved around their chaos, but as two people who had learned how fragile and beautiful second chances could be. They weren't rushing this time. The world no longer demanded it. Across town, Noah was packing boxes in his small studio apartment. The decision to leave hadn't been easy, but it felt right. He'd been offered a position with a design firm in Florence, a chance to rebuild his career, to start over in a place where no one knew his mistakes. As he taped the last box, he paused by the window. Outside, the street buzzed with quiet life. A couple walking their dog, an old man reading a paper, children chasing a ball. He smiled faintly. For years, he'd thought home was a fixed point, a single person, a specific address. But now he understood. Home was motion. It was the courage to walk towards something uncertain, to accept that the only permanence in life was change itself. He took one last look around the room, switched off the light, and stepped into the late afternoon sun. Mira stood in the bookstore where it had all begun, where she and Daniel had first met years ago. The shelves smelled of paper and dust, the soft murmur of people flipping pages filling the air. She ran her hand over the spine of a book, a quiet melancholy in her chest. There had been a time when she thought love had to mean forever. Now she knew better. Love could also mean letting someone go, allowing them to find peace, even if that peace wasn't with you. Outside the window, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, older, wiser, softer somehow. The girl who used to chase stories was now part of one. She smiled, picked up a novel, and walked to the counter. When the cashier asked if she wanted it wrapped, she shook her head. "No," she said gently. "I'll read it today." Later that evening, Daniel and Emma walked along the riverside. The city lights shimmered across the water, and a faint breeze carried the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was alive, comfortable, filled with the rhythm of two people who understood that presence meant more than words. Emma reached for his hand. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met again?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a soft smile. "All the time," he said. "But then I realize, we would have still found our way here. Maybe not like this, maybe not now, but somehow." She squeezed his hand tighter. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "Yeah, some people. They're not accidents. They're the echo of something meant to return." They stopped at the old bridge, the one that overlooked the part of the river where the city reflected most vividly. Daniel leaned against the railing, his eyes tracing the horizon where the last traces of sunlight melted into deep blue. "I used to think life was about big moments," he said after a pause. "The ones that change everything. But now I think it's about the quiet ones. The mornings you wake up next to someone and realize you're safe. The evenings you don't need to say anything at all." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's where forever starts," she murmured. The seasons turned. Spring melted into summer, and their days filled with small rituals, coffee runs, late-night talks, weekend trips outside the city. Daniel's book began to take shape, slowly, quietly. It wasn't about success anymore. It was about truth. One night, after finishing a chapter, he showed it to Emma. "It's not perfect," he warned, handing her the pages. She read silently for a while, her eyes moving carefully across the lines. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." And it is. That night, Daniel realized that healing wasn't a single event. It was a collection of moments, of choices to stay when it's easier to run, to believe when it's easier to doubt. Years later, when people asked him about that time, the years after the storm, the quiet rebirth, he'd smile faintly and say, "It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just life, finally making sense." Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Not destiny, not miracles, but two people deciding, every day, to try again. And somewhere, between the pages of his finished book, he wrote a single line that summed it all up. "We didn't find each other by chance. We found each other by choosing not to give up."